Welcome everybody to the March 2021 CCHB meeting. I'd like to thank all of our new folks that have been signed on, new members. If you didn't get the chance to, I guess we're not going to see the ones that didn't renew, but get everybody on that's renewed. Get the word out there. Tell them to get on. Read your newsletters. We send those out monthly. It's got all the good information and about our speakers when they come up. We've got a good one today from with Mary Reed at Texas Apiary Inspection Service. So I'm sure she's got lots of good information for us. And I don't have any new notes. I hope everybody survived the snowmageddon. I know that I've been seeing lots of posts on Collin County for those that lost colonies. It was a fluke, and I'm sure Blake will probably mention something of that in his tips about what happened and where we can go from there. So Blake, whenever you're ready.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for jumping on. And yeah, like Skip said, I mean, it's been, oh boy, it's been quite a month since we've all spoken. I mean, as you guys all know, I mean, it was quite a month weather-wise, especially for us and our bees. And so we'll definitely get into that a bit and talk about some of what I've seen as a result of that. But I mean, this, I feel like we were closer to spring in our February bee talk than we were in now. It's amazing. I mean, the picture on the left, that's our North Texas bee supply company. And you can see, I mean, you can't see the parking lot. There's like 8 inches of snow on the ground. And the picture on the right, what's stunning about that is our branch south of Houston. I mean, that's south of Houston, and you've got enough snow on the ground they couldn't even come into work, and so, in some ways, our friends in southeast Texas got it worse than we even did in North Texas because their infrastructure can't even handle it as well as ours can, and ours can't handle it that well. So, kind of thinking through what happened, spring blooms, this is some of what I'm seeing right now. The picture on the far left, this is that yellow mustard that is such a wonderful early spring nectar and pollen source. And it really burned that plant back. I mean, I was starting to see some of those plants starting to bloom in February, and that cold, they're still there. The cold just really burned them back. And usually I would see those start to bloom pretty well in late March. I'm thinking it may be into April before we really see those come into full bloom. The dandelions, as you see there in the center, they certainly made a full recovery. Nothing seems to kill those things. And as a beekeeper, we're kind of grateful for that because the dandelions are an awesome, awesome plant for early pollen source for the bees. So they're back 100%. The henbit, the purple one right here that you see, they're pretty much back 100%. You're starting to see some fields that are purple with the henbit. So those are back. And then the far right one here, this is interesting. That is our elm tree. Elm is one of the best early pollen sources for bees. In North Texas, it often starts anywhere from late January to early February, depending on the year. And this year it started in early February. We started seeing that orange colored pollen, light orange pollen come pouring in. That kind of signifies the start of the bee season. And so it really started pouring in for about a week or so. And then the cold hit. And if any of the elm trees that were in bloom or virtually in bloom, when that cold hit, it kind of killed off all those blooms. And so we really had almost no pollen coming in for a week or two after, of any significance anyway, after that cold front hit. And now the elm trees that didn't bloom before the cold front hit are starting to bloom now. And so we're kind of seeing this weird March bloom of the leftover elm trees, which is pretty unusual. Usually it's completely done and wrapped up, by the third week in February. So we're kind of seeing a delay in a lot of those spring blooms, and they're starting to bloom again. But our pollen flow is kind of where I would expect it to be in mid-February, not almost mid-March. So it's picking back up, but it's definitely not as advanced as I would hope it would be. So kind of recovering from the freeze. I mean, yeah, the picture there, that's inside our house. It's like many of you, it was dark for a couple of days. The kids had a fantastic time. They thought it was the best thing that had ever happened in their lives. Parents, not so much. But looking at it from a beekeeping perspective, looking back on it now that most of us have had a chance to look at our bees, I've gone through our hives that were in Texas, not in California. I'm kind of seeing a couple different types of damage. I'm seeing death, just dead hives completely if they were under about 3 frames of bees, which I fully expected. Hives that didn't have a lot of bees just couldn't keep their hives warm enough in a lot of cases. So I've talked to a lot of people, and about 60 to 70% of people I've talked to have lost bees, and certainly those weak ones. And then we also saw some incredibly strong hives die that didn't have a lot of food reserves. And so if you had a really good hive with a lot of bees, a lot of brood, and they didn't have a lot of reserves stocked away, then they didn't have the food they needed to keep the hive warm. Because bees eat honey and then vibrate their wing muscles to generate heat, and to do all that vibrating takes a lot of food. So if a strong hive doesn't have not only a lot of food but easy access to that food, right around and in the brood nest, then a strong hive can starve too and freeze. So we saw some of that as well. And there's nothing as sickening as having 10 frames of bees dead, but it certainly happens. Not a lot, but we did see some of that too. So I kind of already discussed it slowed the spring down, but we've actually had a really warm, almost unseasonably warm week and a half, and the rest of this week's unseasonably warm. And so spring is catching up really quickly, which is really nice to see after that cold. Now's the time to think about repopulating any of the equipment. If you lost bees, don't throw the equipment away. Don't throw the comb away. That honeycomb that's left over is one of the most valuable assets you have as a beekeeper. The previous hive that died spent a whole lot of time, effort, honey, drawing out all that honeycomb, and it's perfectly fine to reuse. So, you've already won. You've already got half of the battle won when it comes to beekeeping, because you have all those resources and all that comb. So if you're new to beekeeping and you lost bees, whether it was to the cold or something else, just know that all that equipment you still have, those frames of comb you still have, is going to allow you to, if you buy a package of bees or you buy a nook to replenish that equipment, they are going to grow so much faster this year because they don't have to spend all that time and effort drawing out all that honeycomb. So don't be too discouraged. You can jumpstart your growth a lot faster this year than last year. Finally, implications for a honey crop. What is this going to do to our honey crop this year in North Texas? I have no idea. I don't think it's going to dramatically affect our honey crop. I think the honey crop should be largely on time. If anything, maybe it'll be a week late. But in general, I think that a lot of the plants that we rely on for our honey crop either weren't up yet, and so the freeze didn't kill them, or if they were up yet, it was in such an early stage that they will largely be able to recoup. So, but in general, the things I was looking for, the Indian blanket, the scabiosa, the clovers, most of those were not even up yet when the freeze hit. So I think we're going to be okay for a honey crop. And just a reminder, guys, I should have said this early on, but if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box, and I will certainly see those and answer them as we go along. And then I'll certainly pause for any questions at the end if you have them. Okay, so current conditions, we discussed this a little bit, but brood rearing's behind, but I'm starting to see a rapid increase in brood rearing in most hives. Anywhere for small weak hives, they may only have a half a frame of brood, up to strong hives. They've got multiple frames of brood already at this point. I'm seeing a return in the pollen flow in North Texas, but many hives still have really low pollen stores. They're kind of using it as fast as it's coming in. And so they don't have the stores I would like to see. Temperatures appear steady, and super strong hives are bouncing back incredibly fast from the cold. Feeding, my recommendation for March is to feed to maintain about a 20-pound surplus in the second box, in your second brood box, for hives that are strong. So 4 hives that are a deep box full of bees or more. So, for a really weak hive, that's 3 frames of bees, you don't need 20 pounds of honey stored up in the second box. You may only need a couple frames of honey total. But if you've got good, strong hives, keep those reserves. And the February freeze that we just had is a perfect example of why it's so important to maintain those reserves in the second box in case you have these incredibly cold spells, which hopefully we don't have anything like that in March, but we can certainly have a sudden week in March where the bees can't go out and forage. So maintaining those reserves is important. That being said, you don't need to maintain more than that. So, if you've got a medium box full of honey on your hive, well, that weighs about 40 pounds. You're far above what's needed. So don't worry about maintaining more than that. Just maintain about 20 pounds. If the bees need it, if you don't have the 20-pound surplus in a second box, you can feed a 1-to-1 syrup. That'll help stimulate the queen, and it'll give them some food to keep growing with. I still recommend using a division board feeder or a top feeder rather than an entrance feeder, because entrance feeders can tend to promote robbing, especially when the bees are growing really rapidly and there's not a lot of forage coming in yet. And then finally, just check 2 to 3 times over March to make sure that they've got the reserves that they should. Bees grow really, really quickly. And so, make sure that you're checking a couple times a month in March to make sure that they've got the food reserves. Okay, so pollen patties for March, largely unnecessary. In general, there's more than enough pollen coming in the month of March. You don't need to worry about pollen patties. Again, kind of like we saw in February, I don't usually recommend pollen patties in February either, except that I did right before that huge cold front hit. I was saying, oh, put the pollen patties on because we've got this massive cold front coming in. So the same really applies for March. If you see that the bees aren't going to be able to forage for about a week, if it's under 55 degrees for about a week, then I throw a pollen patty on just to sustain all that brood that the bees have got being reared. All the brood that's being reared in those hives. So it's unlikely you're going to need to feed pollen patties, but just keep an eye out. Watch for those cold weeks. And if you see them, then go ahead and feed. If you see less than half a frame of cumulative pollen stored in your hive for a strong hive, you might go ahead and give them a pollen patty. So if you've got a really good hive, a deep box full of bees or more, and you're going through it frame by frame and you're just not seeing any stored pollen or very little stored pollen, go ahead and give them a pollen patty, because that's going to really allow them to keep rearing brood. It may just mean that the bees are still not finding enough pollen after that freeze killed everything back. But hopefully that's not the case. And I'm starting to see some decent pollen reserves in stronger hives. March varroa mites, in general, like we talked about in February, in general, you don't need to worry about testing for, you don't need to worry about freezing. Sorry, I was reading a chat. You don't need to worry about treating for varroa mites in March. In most cases, if you took care of varroa mites in fall, then you shouldn't have a problem in the spring. Now, if you didn't treat or test for varroa mites since last summer, definitely need to do a test. You might have a problem. But if you did a test in September or October and had no issue with varroa mites, you're probably just fine. However, it doesn't hurt to do a test in March just to double check and confirm that. If your mites are over 2 per 100 bees, then I do recommend doing a treatment in March, because March is a great time to do a treatment. As far as what type of treatment to use, I'm working on creating a Texas-specific tool that shows exactly what treatments to use in Texas, what time of year, depending on your conditions, and even how to use natural treatments that are not treatments, but natural management techniques that don't use chemicals. So I'm working on a tool that you can kind of plug in your information and it shows you what and how to use it. Until then, there's a really awesome nationwide tool to use, and that's from the Honeybee Health Coalition. So just Google Honeybee Health Coalition Varroa, and you'll see it's kind of like a quiz that you can answer questions about your bees and the time of year, and it'll show you what treatments or natural controls you can use, and then it will walk you through how to use them. So that's a really, really awesome tool to kind of walk if you're confused by what treatments to use and when to use them, et cetera. Before we get too far on that, someone asked a question in the chat that was a really good one. Should I freeze unused pollen patties? So if you've got extra pollen patties that your bees don't need, you've got two options. One is, yes, just freeze them and use them this fall. It's perfectly fine to do that. Or just give them to your bees. I mean, it's not going to hurt bees at all to give them a pollen patty. A lot of beekeepers I know give pollen patties all through the spring, March and April. And the bees, it's not critical, but it helps the bees to grow faster because they've got surplus nutrition. So you could, yes, either freeze them, which is perfectly fine, or just, go ahead and give them to your bees and give them a little boost if you don't want to try to save them until this fall. The next thing to consider is this is a common issue in March, is your bees are getting really crowded. And so they're growing really quickly. And, what do you do? Because it's a little early to make a split. So if you've got a hive that the bottom box is pretty much full of bees, the top box is 80% full of bees, then you need to do something because you're at risk of swarming. So if your bottom box is 40% full and your top box is 60% full, you're fine. The bees still have plenty of room to grow. But if your bottom box is virtually 100% full, top box is 80-ish% full, you got to do something. Your hive's going to swarm. You've got really three options. One, you can make a split. I don't really recommend that this time of year because you're going to have a hard time finding queens. And sure, you can let them raise their own queen, but that kind of comes with a host of disadvantages. It takes a long time for the bees to raise their own queen. You don't know the genetics. The failure rate is pretty high on a walk-away split. You can do it, but you're running a lot of risks. If it's really important to you that you maintain a certain number of hives and you don't lose hives, then I don't recommend a walk-away split. If you're an experienced beekeeper and just kind of want to play with it, sure, do a walk-away split and see what happens. But I don't really recommend a split. I recommend waiting till you can get queens in April. So until then, the best thing to do is add boxes, add another box of foundation, give them some syrup every week, and they'll draw out a third box for you, which is a big plus, and you can make that many more splits in April. Or you could equalize. So you can take frames of brood from that really strong hive, shake the bees off of it, and put it in the very center of weaker hives to boost up the weaker hives and pull down the strength on that stronger hive a bit to pump the brakes a bit to keep them from swarming. Oh, well, there you go. There's the picture of this is it'll probably show up in a minute on your screen, but that's a swarm cell. So you can kind of see this hive is ready to swarm. So I'm glad the picture popped up because it reminded me the one time I do recommend making early splits in March is if your hive is preparing to swarm. So if you've got a hive with swarm cells all over the place, like this picture, then splitting is the only way to prevent a swarm. Once a hive has queen cells, swarm cells everywhere, it's virtually impossible to prevent them from swarming. The only way I've ever found to successfully stop a hive from swarming once they've got to the point of raising swarm cells is by splitting them. And then you can make sure every split has a frame with queen cells on it. And there you go. You've got new splits and you've got queen cells already being developed. It's a great way to make a split. Someone asked on the chat, what if my top boxes have more bees than my bottom box? Do I reverse those? Yes, you do. I've got a slide on that in just a minute. And so great question. Yeah, you're going to reverse those boxes, but we'll hit that in just a minute. Spring requeening. I'm not going to talk about this too much because it's a little early. We'll hit this, I'm sure, more in April. But I do recommend proactively requeening your hives each year. And that it's hard to requeen a hive where the queen seems healthy, but queens can fail quickly. And if they fail at the wrong time of year, you're not going to be able to find a queen to replace them. So I do really recommend proactively requeening every April is my favorite time to do it. April or May, depending on when you can get queens. Now, a little tip for you that a lot of folks do that works really well. If you've got a queen that appears really healthy and she's a year old, but she's still laying great and you don't want to kill a great laying queen, what you can do is you can pull a frame of brood and bees and a frame of honey out of a strong hive, put them in a 5-frame nook box, put a division board feeder inside the nook box, and fill the rest of the box with empty frames. Put your old queen in that nook box, requeen your big existing hive with a new queen. So now you've got your original hive that's got a brand new queen, so they are good to go. They're going to keep pressing on, producing honey, making splits, etc. Then you've got a nook box with a frame of brood and bees, a frame of honey covered in bees too, and then you've got 2 empty frames, and you've got a division board feeder that you can put, fill half full of syrup. And then you can just let that nook grow. And as long as that queen keeps laying and keeps going strong, you can harvest brood out of that nook if you want to give brood to a different hive. And you can just kind of maintain that little nook over here on the side, kind of as a backup. If you have one of your other hives lose a queen or get really weak and you can't get a replacement queen, well, you can add that nook back to that hive. You got to keep in mind that queen's going to fail at some point, but you can kind of keep her going and keep her producing brood for your use in a nook box over to the side. Just because, we don't have time to get into how to requeen, when to requeen, finding queens. If you go to our Texas Bee Supply YouTube channel or our website, we've got videos on how to find queens, when to requeen, what to do if you can't find the queen, etc. So that'll give you a little more resources if you need to get some more information. Final slide before I'll open it up for any questions. Someone asked about reversing boxes. Yes, March is a great time to reverse boxes. So if you've got, the majority of the bees are in your second brood box and the bottom brood box is, just has a few bees in it, or not nearly as many as are in the top box, this is the time to reverse those boxes. Bees naturally like to move up instead of down. And so by reversing those boxes, you're kind of giving them the space they need to move up when they want to. So yeah, March is the ideal time to do that. So that is the last slide. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. Oh, one quick note that I didn't mention on that last slide is now's the time to pull out your entrance reducers. So if you haven't pulled out your entrance reducers, now is the ideal time to do that. So any questions that I missed? I know I ran through that fast, but there's a lot to cover for March. So just the biggest thing to keep in mind is monitor your feed, make sure your bees have enough food, and watch your hives for swarming. And the way you prevent swarming is when that top box gets 80% full, it's time to add another box, equalize, or split. So Jesse, you wanted to see the frame with the queen cells again. Sure, I can definitely show you that. I'll jump back over here. There we go. There's the frame with the queen cells. And these are swarm cells, theoretically. If you read all the bee books, they say, well, you can tell the difference between a swarm cell and a supersedure cell. Now, supersedure cell is when the queen is failing, the bees just want to replace her. A swarm cell is when a hive's gotten too big and strong and they want to swarm. They always say you can tell the difference because supersedure cells are always going to be in the center area of a frame, and swarm cells are going to be around the perimeter of a frame, or the bottom or the sides often. That is frequently true, but not always true. I've certainly seen supersedure cells on the bottoms and sides, and I've seen swarm cells in the middle. The way I tell the difference is if I'm going through a hive and it's weak and the brood looks bad and they've got queen cells, they're trying to replace that old queen. If I'm going through the hive and everything looks good and it's bursting at the seams with bees and they've got queen cells, 9 times out of 10, they're preparing to swarm. So one person asked, they were saying when I was talking about adding a third box to a full hive, instead of giving syrup to encourage them to draw out frames, can you use honey frames from a dead out? How many honey frames to put in a third box and where? Checkerboard them, etc. So if you've got frames of honey from a dead out, I wouldn't necessarily, I would use those in a new hive. I would use, or in a split. I would save those to put in a split if you're making splits. I wouldn't necessarily give those to a really strong hive in a third box. Really, the whole point of giving a really strong hive a third box is to slow them down until you can get queens and make a split in April. And if you're giving them a bunch of frames of honey, then that's not going to slow them down a whole lot. Now, if your goal isn't to make a split, then sure, you could give them those frames of honey. Checkerboarding is it's fine to do in a box of foundation. So if you're adding a brand new box, you can checkerboard, put every other frame comb and every other frame foundation. When I never recommend checkerboarding is you never want to checkerboard when you've got brood involved. So you never want to have an empty frame separating frames of brood. The golden rule, and one of the golden rules in beekeeping, is you always keep frames of brood together. You never separate frames of brood with empty frames or shove frames of brood to the outside. Bees have to keep frames of brood warm. And if you separate them apart with empty frames, then they have a hard time keeping the brood nest warm enough. So, Alan, you said pull the entrance reducer or open it up quite a bit. I would pull the entrance reducers at this point. I mean, we've got days in the mid 70s this week coming. So I would pull the entrance reducers at this point off completely. So great question. Any other questions that I've missed?
Hey, Blake, one of the things we did notice that Ladybird Johnson did put out that the freeze did affect quite a bit of the early blooming trees, and our flowering quince has took a pretty hard hit, and several other things. So I know that that's going to be a big thing for our early tree blooms as far as pollen. So I think that they're saying it's going to be pretty much kind of behind. I think the red buds got zapped pretty good too.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah. Somebody said we put, so I assume you put solid bottom boards on for the cold weather. Should you pull them off now and put screen bottom boards on? Yes, now's the time to get those screen bottom. If you did take the screen bottom boards off, or if you covered your screen bottom boards, pull all that off. We should be free and clear of those below freezing weeks at this point. And then another question someone asked, remind me of how to feed using a plastic bag laid across the top of the frames. So yeah, one way you can feed instead of one feeder style, if you will, is just get a Ziploc bag, gallon Ziploc bag or a quart Ziploc bag, fill it about half to 2/3 full of syrup. And then you can lay it across the top bars of a hive and get a razor blade and just poke some holes on the top of the Ziploc bag, 3 or 4 or 5 holes. Then you're going to get an empty box with no frames on it and put it on top of the hive, and then put your lid on top of that. And then the bees will kind of crawl on top of that Ziploc bag and suck the syrup out of the holes on the Ziploc bag. You have to be very careful with doing that this time of year. It's great for winter feeding because it gives put syrup right on top of the top bars, right on top of the cluster. This time of year, having that empty box sitting around the bag of syrup is an open invitation for bees as they're growing to move up and start building comb in that empty box where the Ziploc bag is. So it works this time of year. You just got to keep an eye out. If you let it sit for a couple of weeks and your hive is super strong, they'll fill that whole empty box up with comb. So, and then the last question that I think I missed, someone said you have a weak hive and you think it might be best to leave the entrance reducer on. Yeah, I mean, if you've got a really weak hive, you can leave the entrance reducer on. That's fine. But if you've got a hive that's, I'm going to say, more than a half a box full of bees, I'd go ahead and pull those entrance reducers off just so they don't overheat when we get these warm days. So, all right, sorry for that, Skip. Right back at you. Back to you.
I appreciate it. We're right on schedule still. So our next speaker is going to be Mary Reed. She's from our Texas Apiary Inspection Service. She came on in about August of 2014, which is about the time that I came on. I think I met her at the summer clinic, and she became one of my inspectors. And then I think it was January of 2018, she became the chief apiary inspector and has done great things for Texas Beekeepers. I know on the commercial side, she really works with us on getting our inspections and making sure we're good for California and all the movement across the county to get our honey flows. And she's also a great resource on the laws and things that come on. She's helped me out on several different occasions with some people that want to bug our customers and say we don't have raw honey. So we worked that out. But she's also one of our people that have helped start the Texas Master Beekeeper program. So that's one of the things that service provides there. And matter of fact, they've got a testing period coming up here pretty soon, if I'm not mistaken. And I will turn it over to Mary.
Awesome. Thanks, Skip. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, yeah, I hear you.
Awesome. Well, I first have to say I'm so glad that I hopped on right at 6:30 to catch Blake's talk, because there's some really awesome information in there, and it got me even more excited for the upcoming beekeeping season. So yeah, I hope all y'all are just as excited as I am. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, awesome. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit. We'll start off talking about our current beekeeping laws, and a little bit about my office, the Texas Apiary Inspection Service. And then we'll dive into, you know, the things that my office does beyond inspections. So let's kick it off with just a little bit of introduction. So my office was first established in 1910, and that came from new laws that were enacted to control for foul brood disease, specifically American foul brood. Back at that time, American foul brood was a widespread and rampant problem throughout the entire industry. And so a lot of different states developed new laws to create apiary inspection programs to try and control this disease. It wasn't until 1920 that we got our first chief inspector. And my office is housed underneath the Texas A&M University system. My office is located here in College Station. We cover the whole state, but we're a little bit unique that we're housed with a university. Typically, inspection programs are housed underneath Department of Agriculture's. But we get to be housed here with Texas A&M, and it's a really great relationship that we have here. It's awesome to have an entomology department, so if we have any issues that come up in the field, we have a vast array of entomologists right at our fingertips that we can turn to if we need to. So as I mentioned, you know, a bunch of different apiary inspection programs were created primarily because of American foul brood. Almost every state has some form of an apiary inspection program, but all of our office's focus is on American foul brood. Of course, we look for all sorts of pests and diseases that can affect honeybees. But with American foul brood, these inspection services were largely successful in their efforts of controlling the disease. And today, you know, American foul brood still exists in the industry, but it's not as large of an issue as it once was. A bunch of us inspectors across the United States and then also Canada create this organization called Apiary Inspectors of America. My office is part of it, and it's a really great way for us to stay in communication with other inspection programs across the country, and like I said, in Canada. And there's constant communication about issues that may be popping up in other states, ways that we can help the industry, educational efforts that you know we've want to develop together. So you know, it's a really great organization that I'm really proud to be a part of. So our missions here at Texas Apiary Inspection is first and foremost, our goal is to safeguard the apiary industry of Texas, but then that extends, you know, to the apiary industry across the nation. And we do this through the application of science-based regulations, creating and supporting educational opportunities, and then of course, maintaining open communication with the industry. And that doesn't mean just the apiary industry. We all know that bees are have a very close relationship with agriculture across the board. So we try to build relationships with other agricultural industries and keep those communication pathways going. So here in Texas, we do have some bee laws. We have our agricultural code, chapter 131, bees and honey. My office deals with just the bee part. We don't really have a hand in the honey aspect. That is underneath the Texas Department of State Health Services. But anything having to do with bees, otherwise, is handled by my office. And then we also have our administrative code, or what we call our rules, chapter 71 bees, which is just kind of a supplement to our agricultural code. We have copies of both of these on our website, and if you ever need some great bedtime reading, they're there for you to read. I also have a recorded PowerPoint presentation that's just like a shortened version of this one. So if you ever need a little refresher, there's that presentation there for you as well. So under our bee laws, it talks a lot about requirements of the beekeeping industry, what we require beekeepers here in Texas to do, and part of that is giving us my office the ability to control disease as needed, and I'd like to specify as needed. Because if you're reading through this language, there's a lot of very strong wording in here that can come across rather alarming. But these powers and duties are used in instances where disease has gotten out of control, or if there is a new pest or disease that's introduced that needs to be controlled so it doesn't spread across the industry. We have the power to step in and control the issue. And right now, the only instance that this would really come up is with American foul brood. And, fingers crossed, we don't have anything new introduced. So this is my team. This is Texas Apiary Inspection Service. So it's myself, Bill Baxter. He's our Assistant Chief Apiary Inspector. He's been with the service for a little over 30 years. He is just an incredible person all around, and just a vast knowledge in beekeeping and the history of beekeeping and history of beekeeping in Texas. If you ever get the opportunity to chat with him or have an inspection with him, jump at it, because he's just a wealth of knowledge. And then I have two other inspectors, Hannah Blackburn. She's been with us for about 2 years. And then Taylor, I was able to hire her in early March of last year. So she got 2 weeks of just normal office operations before the university shut down because of COVID. And so she's kind of had a very unique onboarding experience, but she's been a really go-getter, really loves the bees, really loves working with beekeepers. But this is us. And like I said, we cover the whole state of Texas. So with inspections, we primarily perform inspections on our migratory beekeepers. We do cater to other beekeepers, sideliners, small-scale beekeepers, only if there's ever an issue that comes up, or if these beekeepers request an inspection from us. Inspections, if you're selling bees or queens in Texas, you're not required to get an inspection from us. If you don't get an inspection from my office, you are required to provide a signed health affidavit to your customers. And basically your health affidavit would say you haven't been inspected, but you believe your bees to be disease-free. If you do want to have an inspection and request an inspection for your selling of bees and queens, we can do that. It's only $75 for an entire inspection. And we can provide you with a certificate of inspection that you can make copies of and hand out to your customers. So it's entirely up to you on what you prefer. And of course, we do emergency inspections as needed. We understand that sometimes you stick your head in a hive and you have no clue what's going on. You know there's something wrong, but you're really concerned about, a disease issue. Give us a call, send us an email, and we will talk with you through it. We'll a lot of times we'll ask you to send pictures of the issue that you're seeing, or pictures or video, and that will really help us with an initial diagnosis. We'll also probably talk to you a little bit about the life history of the hive, kind of what your management practices were and what the hive was doing up to that point. And then if there's if there's a concern about disease, we'll go ahead and schedule an inspection with you as soon as possible. And with these emergency inspections, we don't charge for them because we want to make sure that the situation is handled as quickly as possible. And we don't want it to be, we don't want paying for an inspection to be a deterrent to a beekeeper from asking for help in those types of situations. What we do on an inspection, on a normal inspection, is that we want to see brood. Brood is where you're going to see any health issues. So whenever we crack open a hive, we'll go down to the brood chamber and look at a couple frames of brood. We can take samples. We will take samples to test for varroa mites, and then also we can test for nosema, which is a gut microsporidium. And then typically on requested inspections, I tell the beekeeper, we're there in your time. You're the one paying for the inspection. So whatever you want to talk about, we can talk about. Whatever questions you have, ask them. We're happy to answer them as best we can. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. And like I said, we can take all sorts of samples if there's any type of concern about disease. So our office also handles the movement of honeybee colonies in and out of the state, but also across county lines within Texas. So we have our import and export permits for bringing bees in and then taking bees out. We have our intrastate permit, which is for crossing county lines. I put bee removal transportation permit under there, and I'll get back to that. It's kind of a special conversation. We have what's called a queen certificate. This is a special kind of inspection that we do for our queen breeders. And it's typically requested by our commercial queen breeders because it is a $300 inspection. And on that inspection, we look at the yard where they're raising their queens, and then we look at a few of their out yards where they are producing their drones. We also provide a special type of sampling specifically for our queen breeders. So we collect samples of drones to get tested for their sperm viability, so that it's, again, information for them just to see how their operation is doing. And then they get these special little tags, so we call their queen tags, but they're basically miniature health certificates that they can stick on boxes that they're mailing. Just so some states require that queens come in with their health certificate. So, with these large producers, that sometimes they're shipping queens all over the place, so they like to slap that little tag on there. We also have what's called an apiary equipment brand number. What this is, it's a unique identification number for each beekeeper. And we offer this because under the current laws, technically you're required to identify your hives. And you can do that either putting your name and information on the outside of your boxes, or you can get a brand number from our office. It's just $10 to get a brand number. It's a one-time thing. You don't have to renew it every year. And some beekeepers like to get it just because it's a way to identify their boxes without advertising their name and information. And this number is only known by the beekeeper and my office. It's not shared with anybody else. In addition to that, we also have apiary registration. This is free and it's voluntary. No matter how many hives you have, you are not required to register your apiary location with us. But if you do, we have an application for it. And you can fill it out online and email it, fax it, or mail it to our office. What this is you're just saying, hey, these are where my bees are located. And the benefit to this, or to me, what the number one benefit is that we know where your bees are located. But if there's any sort of disease issue that comes up in your area, we can notify you. Recently, I was working with the Texas Boll Weevil Eradication Foundation. They work with cotton growers on spraying for and controlling for boll weevil. And so I've worked with them. They tell me what their plans are. And I can send it out to beekeepers that may have hives in those counties or near cotton fields. And so they have the information on how to get notified by that eradication foundation. So anyway, just some pros. I don't really see any cons to it, but anyway, like I said, it's free. It's also a one-time thing. You don't have to renew it on an annual basis. All right, let's jump back to bee removal. I like to call this permit the sister permit to the intrastate permit. So what I mean by that is it is not a license to bee removal. It is still a movement permit that covers cross-county movements with bees. The reason that we have a separate one is because under the Texas Structural Pest Control Law, there is an exemption for beekeepers who want to conduct bee removals. And the exemption is that beekeepers are not required to get a pest control license. However, they are required to register with my office, and then you're not allowed to use any chemicals during a removal. So if we get this permit sent into our office, the first thing that we do is check to see if the beekeeper is registered, because we will not process this permit unless a beekeeper is in compliance with the structural pest control law. Then we use the counties that the beekeeper provides on this permit to generate a list. And we provide this list on our website. And we do this as a public service because sometimes, a homeowner will all of a sudden realize that they have some bees on the side of their house or in a tree, on their property, wherever, and they want to have it removed, but they would prefer to have the bees removed alive. And sometimes turning to a pest control service, they may not necessarily do a live removal, and it may be really expensive. So we provide this list of beekeepers on our website. They are listed by the counties that they operate in. Whenever somebody from the public calls our office and says they need a bee removal, we tell them what their options are, and we direct them to this list, and we tell them call every beekeeper listed there, just because we cannot vouch for the services that these beekeepers provide. And so we want to make sure that the customer is doing their due diligence and is calling every beekeeper that is available to them. We have a disclaimer on our webpage, but it's become a really popular list. I think it's done a lot of good. I hope it's done a lot of good. But like I said, I like maintaining that list just because, so it is an additional resource for the public to turn to. Okay, I think that's that is my brief overview of our bee laws. Bee laws are not long and extensive. Like I said, they are available on our website and available to read. If you do read through them and you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're happy to answer any questions that you have about them. But now I'm going to transition into kind of some of the extra stuff that we do that goes beyond doing inspections. And I like to start off giving a little bit, this little timeline of introductions that we've had with the apiary industry over time. Starting off, 1910, we were created because of American foul brood. Then over time, we've had the introduction of tracheomites, pheromites, Africanized honeybees. I don't have small hive beetle on there. Colony collapse disorder became a mainstream thing. And then I have question marks because there's always something new out there. And I think 2019/2020, we saw the introduction of the Asian giant hornet up in Washington State, but also in Canada. That's one of those question marks, that it is a novel pest that can be a threat to honeybees, but it's not the only one that's out there. There's quite a few other pests and diseases that can be really damaging that we don't have here, but it's very possible for us to get. And so I mentioned this partially as a segue, but also to encourage beekeepers to be aware of what the possibilities are, and at least be knowledgeable enough to where you can recognize not what it is specifically, but recognize that this is different than something that you've seen before, and know who to contact. And so my office, of course, would be one of those people. But anyway, I encourage you to keep your eyes and ears open for those new things, and stay active in your hives, stay vigilant. So we have all these things, all these introductions, all these challenges in the beekeeping industry, but all these challenges, and yet we have this increasing demand for bees. And I love using almond pollination as an example because it is the example these days. I'm sure Blake and Skip can speak more to this and to their experience doing almonds. But over time, and if we're looking at a graph, I apologize if it's very tiny on your screen. But over time, there has been an ever increasing demand for honeybees for almond pollination. In 2020, there were about 1.2 million bearing acres of almonds, and they estimated that they needed 2.4 million colonies to pollinate. And this graph, if the top line is showing what they estimate the demand is, and what the line below it shows the actual colonies that were shipped. And in 2020, they needed 2.4 million, or that was their estimate that they needed, but only 1.9 million colonies were actually shipped out there for pollination. And as we can see, the next, 2021, they estimated even higher. I don't think they have the numbers yet on how many colonies actually were shipped out there, but I just love this example because it really does show, all the challenges that beekeepers have, and yet there is this such a demand for bees in big agriculture. So, currently, okay, I also love this. So they needed 2.4 million colonies. It's estimated that we currently have about 2.98 million colonies in the US. When I saw that, I was looking at the numbers the other day for this presentation. And when I saw that, I was like, that blows my mind. I hope your mind is being blown right now. So we have almost 3 million colonies in the US, and there's this increasing demand for bees for pollination. And all these challenges that beekeepers are having with managing their bees, new methods need to be found to at least sustain the number of colonies that we have, if not increase. And so with that, we need novel solutions for the industry to help out the bees and help out the beekeepers. Here with inspection services, my favorite part of this job is being able to work with beekeepers, but then also being able to work with the research side and kind of being a liaison between the two. So if there's anything new out in the research world, we can bring that to beekeepers And then if there are any issues that beekeepers are seeing, or if a beekeeper says, I really wish somebody would investigate A, B, and C, we can turn to researchers and say, this is what beekeepers are really interested in knowing. This is what they need. Some examples to show some the beekeeper research collaboration. Bee Informed Partnership is a really great organization overall. They do a lot of different stuff. It's mostly related to data collection. They have a really great website where they show all of this data that they've collected over time, and you can get in there and play around and see what's specific for your state and compare it to other states. There's so much on there. That's a whole other presentation. But they have what's called tech transfer teams, and these teams they get hired by commercial beekeepers to basically go and sample their colonies and really dig deep in their colonies, take really detailed notes, and they'll even follow the beekeeper around over the season, taking samples, checking their hives, and again, collecting data for the beekeeper, just seeing what the status of their hives are, what's the status of their operation, working with a beekeeper, potentially advising them on maybe some management changes to make to improve their operation and maybe relieve some economic burden there is with some management options. So it's a really, really neat program that is available to beekeepers. My office, along with quite a few other apiary inspection programs, work with the USDA on what's called the National Honeybee Survey. And what this is, it is a project that is done across the entire United States. Of course, you can see by the map, the states that are in white don't have any data. I think this is from 2019. But what this is, we are provided sampling boxes, and we go out to a beekeeper, and we collect samples of live bees, samples of bees and alcohol. We collect samples of pollen or wax, and these samples get tested for varroa levels, eczema levels, get tested for different viruses. The pollen or wax, they switch between years on what they want collected. Get tested for pesticide residues. Part of the survey is monitoring for what's called the trobolelapse mite, which is, I call it the varroa's skinnier, faster cousin. It's one of those pests that we don't have here, and we don't want here, but trobolelapse. And again, data collection. They collect all this data, and they've been doing it since 2009. This is one of those projects that they publish online, and you can go on there and look at the data across years. You can see how Texas compares to other states. And this is their website, the research.beinformed.org, that you can go to and play around with that data. So that's one of the projects. Another one that we do is, this was spearheaded by the Pennsylvania State Inspector, and she wanted to collaborate with, initially she wanted to collaborate with other states that had deep water ports. So a few years ago, we collaborated with Pennsylvania on doing a project where we set up swarm traps in 4 deep water ports in Texas. And this swarm trap is a picture from one of the Houston terminals that I used to go to. And the idea was to collect any swarms that came off of ships, international ships. And we would collect these swarms and analyze them for their varroa levels. We do varroa and eczema. But then we would also look for trobolelapse. And then we would also see if we would study their wing venation for any Apis cerana. And from there, the project kind of turned into studying different trap types to attract different bee and wasp species. The goal is to find a trap and a bait type that works really well for catching bee and wasp species, with the idea of having a trap that's readily available for trapping any exotic species. And we are in our second year. We're going to do a third year of doing this project. And we have sites set up around various locations around College Station. And about once a month or every 2 weeks, my inspector, Hannah, she goes out and checks the traps. And basically what she does, this is one of the traps here. She opens up the trap and empties it out through a strainer, and she gets, depending on the season, she gets an interesting array of insects. I think looking at this picture from far away, it's rather alarming to see such large things in there, but those are beetles for the most part. So apparently they work really well for things beyond bees and wasps. We do catch quite an interesting variety of bees and wasps, but also apparently beetles and moths really like these traps as well. Anyway, she collects these samples, and they get shipped off to Pennsylvania for identification. So in the end, the goal is to figure out what is the best trap type and what's the best type of attractant for catching any sort of exotic bee or wasp. So we were talking about, all these introductions of issues that we have to deal with in beekeeping, and then this huge increase in demand for beekeeping. But what we've also seen is a really big boom in the interest of beekeeping. Specifically, a good marker for this is when the term colony collapse disorder came out. And we've just seen a really incredible increase in the number of small-scale beekeeping. In Texas, I don't know how many there are out there. I estimate there's probably around 5,000 to 6,000 small-scale beekeepers in Texas, but I think that's a safe estimate. I actually think there may be more, but I always like to underestimate. But anyway, we don't know. But I think the population is big out there here in Texas. And what I think is so amazing about beekeeping is that you can do anything for your career, but you can be a beekeeper. And I think that says a lot about the industry. And I think it's something that's really unique about our industry, because we have so many people of different backgrounds and different perspectives looking at one insect and keeping one insect. And from there, I think a lot of great ideas, a lot of great questions come up. And I think that's really been transformative for our industry. So our role in all of this, is increasing of popularity of beekeeping. We've had to adjust as a result, and one way that we've adjusted is responding to this increase in demand for information from beginning beekeepers, but then also from people who are not beekeepers. And so that could include, we work a lot with extension agents, whether that's answering questions for them, providing resources for them, or helping them run beekeeping seminars for their local community. We work a lot with homeowners, different municipalities, all sorts of agricultural groups, you name it. We've probably spoken to them at least once. So that's kind of, another fun part of the job is that, we get to work with these different groups, but we still get to talk about bees. So with education, you know, I feel very strongly that education is key. And this first bullet should say education is key for all operations, not just small scale, all beekeepers. And so for our office, you know, pre-pandemic, although virtual is pretty cool and pretty weird. I feel like I'm talking to myself. I just see myself. But anyway, pre-pandemic, you know, we we would attend different bee schools and conferences, local events, you know, just to be there for the beekeepers. And our website, we have a pretty, I like to think, well fleshed out website. But on there, we have a pest and disease section where anyone can go on there and just see the various different pests and diseases you may encounter in a hive. We have our own document for best management practices. It's pretty brief. It's just like a 2-pager. And that one speaks to managing bees for honeybee health, but it also has information on there if you're managing bees in an urban environment. And then a bunch of other educational resources that we've pulled from other universities, other institutions. Blake mentioned Honeybee Health Coalition. We've got pretty much all of their beekeeper related information at your fingertips there. So there's a lot on there for you to check out. This is our website. And so like I said, I don't know if you can see my little pointer, but we have these tabs up here, and one of them is regulations, and that's where you can find copies of our laws and rules. Forms and fees, that's where you'll find any sort of application that we provide. There's a For Beekeepers section where it's information that beekeepers specifically may be interested in. We have a section for the general public. This bee removal tab is where you would find that that list of beekeepers that do bee removals. And then we have this little icon here that says give us a buzz. And that's if you have any questions, comment, good bee joke, good bee story, that you can click on there and it'll take you to a page where you fill in your name and contact information, and then, you know, whatever you want to say to us. I think on my next slide, yeah, I have, this just shows the For Beekeeper section and the pests and diseases. Specifically, when you would click on this, it would show a list of the pests and diseases. And then if you were to click on, say, the American foul brood one, you know, gives you all sorts of information there. But yeah, it's information on integrated pest management practices, testing resources, some information on honey and how to get in contact with the Texas Department of State Health Services. And then, you know, education never ends. And so we've got all sorts of sort of resources there. Okay, so to tie into education, another kind of unique thing that we've started doing is working with veterinarians. And the reason that we've started working with veterinarians is because a few years ago, there were changes to the federal laws that were about the use of antibiotics in animal agriculture. And so since those laws have come into effect, beekeepers now have to go to veterinarians in certain circumstances to get antibiotics for their hives. And at least in the US, veterinarians are not trained in vet school to work with bees. So last year, I was approached by the vet school here at Texas A&M to provide basically a field experience for veterinary students. And so we had two groups of vet students come out. We talked about just kind of some basic beekeeping information, but then also the pests and diseases that you may encounter in a hive, and then we got to go in hives, and it was a blast. It was so much fun. They were so enthusiastic, so interested. And I think that this relationship, in general, with apiary inspection programs and then veterinarians and beekeepers, down the line, when more veterinarians get interested in this and trained in it, will be really beneficial. But for now, my office at least intends on continuing to maintain a line of communication with the vet school and any veterinarians in Texas, providing resources and trainings as needed. And Skip mentioned this earlier, but we also help with the Texas Master Beekeeper Program. This is a collaboration with the Texas Beekeepers Association. And what this is, it's a voluntary, fun program for beekeepers as a way to challenge your knowledge of beekeeping and all the factors that go into that. So it's not necessarily, let me teach you how to keep bees. You do have to have at least 1 year of beekeeping experience in order to start the program. But the goal is to, like I said, really challenge your knowledge that you have about all the various factors that tie into beekeeping. And then in the end, if a beekeeper chooses to progress through the program, what they do is go out and do what we call public service credits. And with these credits, ideally, they're speaking to non-beekeepers and non-beekeeping audiences, and in a way spreading the good word of beekeeping. And so then they become ambassadors for the apiary industry. And we started the program in spring of 2015. And I think we have over 300 beekeepers that have at least taken the first level of the program. There are 4 levels to the program. We have a whole website devoted to this program, a lot of information on there. If you're interested, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer any questions like that or associated with the program. In the end, if you take, if you decide to do the first level, the apprentice level, that's all you want to do, that's awesome. I think that's fantastic. And if you do, you get a super awesome Master Beekeeper patch. And, for me, it's all about the patch. If there's a patch, I'm going to do it. Maybe that will intrigue you as well. But like I said, check out the website. There's a lot of great information on there that's available to anybody. Some more educational resources there. But yeah, like I said, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. So in the end, I like to emphasize we're more than just inspections. Yes, we have the regulatory aspect of it where we're doing our health inspections, we're providing certificates, we're doing any sort of like investigations related to disease. We have our inspections where we're looking for pests, parasites, and pathogens, three Ps. We have a research component where we do a lot of collaborations with other research institutions. We also have our own sampling that we do, and we also have special sampling that we can provide to beekeepers in certain circumstances that we'll send off to other diagnostic labs. And then we, like I mentioned, we have an educational component where we provide sort of programs and workshops and training. We have a lot of educational materials. Like I said, I love education, so of course we're going to have that. And then in the end, I like my office to be a resource for beekeepers. And I think this is the main reason why I emphasize that we're more than just doing inspections. I want beekeepers in Texas to use our office as a resource for anything related to beekeeping. And that's kind of part of my mission here is try to help beekeepers, as best we can, or at least guide you in a direction. If we can't help you directly, to guide you in a direction where you can get the help that's needed. So I'd like to thank all of you for your attention. If you ever need to get in contact with us, we have a phone number. I will tell you, this time of year, we are mostly away from the office. So if you call us, we will try to get back to you as soon as possible, as our voicemail says. But email is also probably the best way to get in contact with us, at least this time of year. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thanks, Mary. If you have questions, just put them on the chat box. We'll get them and make sure they get answered. And we appreciate all your help. Are y'all's group working with this flea beetle moth instance for the commercial side?
So my office has not been contacted directly about this. It's the Chinese tallow.
Right.
Yeah. So no one has yet contacted my office with any questions specifically about that. I can't remember if the comment period has closed or not.
It got extended to April.
Okay, great. So what I would say to anybody who's interested in that situation is, if you're going to comment, I want you to read through that document that was published and provide a constructive response rather than just saying, yes, I support it, or no, I don't. Because what they're looking for, this is just a draft, this is just kind of phase one. So they're really interested in seeing, a constructive response from all industries, but, from the beekeeping industry.
I didn't know if they had contacted the Apiary services and talked to them in reference to the beekeeping operations down there, because I know that puts us in the top 10 in the area in Texas for honey production, but it's also probably one of the largest crops we have in Texas.
Yeah, and I mean, right there, Skip is a great example of a response that I think would be valued by the USDA.
I'm not seeing any questions, but I know that your Texas Master Beekeeper program, when is that one coming up again?
Oh, that's a great question. April. So we're holding a virtual exam. Usually we do an in-person exam twice a year, in the spring and then the fall. But obviously we're not going to be doing in person, at least right now. So we're having a virtual exam, and that will be it will be available to participants April 22nd to April 24th. And usually it's a one-day event, but the benefit of making it virtual is that I can, make the exam available over multiple days to hopefully give some scheduling flexibility to people who want to participate.
Well, we sure do appreciate you and appreciate all y'all's hard work y'all's office does. I know I appreciate it because not only do y'all help the tech transfer guy that comes out to our place, but also with your inspectors coming out, making sure I get my interstate license and all that kind of stuff too. So
we like to do more than that, Skip.
Hey, you keep me on my toes. So I know y'all do more because it seems like I never can get a hold of you when I really need you. But like I said, I know I've contacted you when I've had issues, and you've helped us out and got us pointed in the right direction.
Good.
So I know y'all's resources very well. Especially for Collin County, if you're interested, get on the apiary registration. I know it's voluntary, but it helps her understand how many beekeepers are in the area. As you heard her say, she's guesstimating 5,000 to 6,000. I know through our class alone, we're putting through anywhere from 50 to 100 new beekeepers out there every year.
Oh, that's awesome.
Just in Collin County that go through our seminar here at Sabine Creek. So I know there's lots of backyard beekeepers. It's not for them to come hunt you down. They're there if you need them. And I know several of our hobbyists have used you for certain situations, and it's been great. I know for us here, it's an education opportunity because, like I said, you get to talk with the inspector and things that are going on. You get shown things that you might not have caught on your normal hive. So like I said, it's a very great program. They're not just there for foul brood. So you know, I know that's how it got started, but you know, like I said, it's a lot of information that y'all definitely share with us as we go through that one-on-one with the hive. So we definitely do appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Skip.
So just a quick deal. It's like, how much foul brood have y'all seen here lately? I know that they've got a lot. I think it's what Tylosin can treat for that now. But I mean, have y'all seen any American foul brood?
So as far as American foul brood, we haven't had a positive case in about 7 years. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist here in Texas. But we see more of European foul brood, specifically in the springtime. But I want to stress with foul brood for beekeepers that you know, these changes to the federal law were made for a reason, and just because out of concern of the overuse of antibiotics in animal agriculture. And so if a beekeeper is, you know, is concerned about foul brood in their hive, like don't necessarily jump to using antibiotics, because that can lead to some issues down the line of overuse. With European foul brood, there are some other steps that can be taken before the use of antibiotics. With American foul brood, if the hive is symptomatic, antibiotics aren't going to do anything. But like I said, there's some information on our website about foul brood specifically and the issue of antibiotic use. It's a document that was created by the Honeybee Health Coalition, and I encourage beekeepers to check that out.
Yeah, I've worked with Blake and I've talked to him. I'm actually going to be trying the Super DFM this year with the probiotics.
Okay.
Because we've been seeing, due to the recent rains, these early springs, we've been seeing mild EFB. And so we definitely want to try to keep it under control.
I also think, you know, speaking to Blake's point about feeding bees, because you can sometimes see European foul brood pop up if there is a lack of available resources out there. So with this spring in particular, with the unusual weather that we've had so far and the damage that it's caused to some of the flowering plants that bees rely on, is just to keep an eye out for it. I don't want beekeepers to hear that and then like immediately stress out that they're going to have foul brood. It's just to keep an eye on it. You know, if you ever see something odd, send us a picture, give us a call, and we'll take a look at it, or we'll come out and take a look at it for you. But yeah, you know, this spring in particular, I would encourage beekeepers to be extra nosy in their hives and just make sure everything looks healthy.
All right, I think I've given them enough time to have, if they have any questions. I haven't seen anything else pop up, and I do appreciate it. I'm glad you got to come on. We've been definitely reaching out to some speakers, and we've been wanting to get a lot of information out to our beekeepers. We've got a lot of new ones here in Collin County. It seems like we're getting one of those rollovers, and we're getting a lot more new beekeepers in. So it's definitely greatly appreciated.
Yeah, anytime. Happy to do it. Thanks, Skip. Thanks, everyone.
All right. I think this will conclude our meeting. If anybody has any questions, definitely go to their websites. It's got a lot of good information you can get on. Also, the Texas Beekeepers Association has some stuff listed with their up to their site. And I think we've actually got a resource on one of our resource pages or a note there as a direction to the website also. So, you know, definitely use those resources, get registered, use them. I mean, that's what they're there for. And they've definitely got lots of great information for you and can sometimes answer just over the phone or through a picture. So we definitely do appreciate them and appreciate what they do for us. If that is it, we will conclude our meeting, and we will see y'all next month. Or if you're interested in the board meeting, you'll have to let us know so we can get you on if you're interested in attending. We do have our Honey Queen position filled, but we do have one of our other ones that was not on here is our promotions is open. So if you're still interested in volunteering, let us know. We've got some spots available for you for promotion. Our mentor program is filled, so we're working to get that restarted. and Ed Snyder is working on that. He's got a list, so we'll be contacting you if you were on the previous list. And if you're still interested, we'd like to get that program up and running. So thank you very much. And we will see you either at the board meeting or next month. Thank you.